And we are back on Open Line. Thanks for tuning in this evening. We are talking to attorney Clint Kelly from the Kelly firm right here in the Nashville area. They specialize in medical malpractice. And if you do have a question or a comment, as we often say, this is your forum. This is where we like to hear from you. And if you're sitting wondering as you're watching this evening, do you have a case? Did something happen to you, a friend, a family member, and you're wondering, is there a case? This is what you can do, is call us at 737-7587. Now, Clint, we were talking a little bit about, you've obviously, being an expert in this field, you've seen many, many cases along these lines. Recently, and we're going to show this, but I just wanted to ask you about a little bit, but there was a botched breast surgery situation case that you've really been able to advise quite well on.
Correct. There was a middle-aged lady who had breast augmentation, and following the breast augmentation, she wanted to have liposuction in her abdominal area and a scar revision of her breasts. And scar revision is simply a kind of a removal of surgical scars that are left after the breast augmentation. So she goes into surgery thinking that's what she's going to have, and then when she wakes up and takes the bandages off, her nipple and the area around her nipple is turning black. And she's thinking, that's not the surgery that I was supposed to have. I was supposed to have simple scar revision. And now, Chuck, she's lost her nipple and she's deformed. Her breasts don't match. So it was a mixture of not only the surgery being botched, in the opinion of our plastic surgery expert that we have, but also, remember I told you about a medical battery. She didn't authorize the surgery that he did.
Oh.
So I don't know whether he was a case of mistaken identity or whether there was some other motive behind it, but she's now deformed and she's going to be that way probably for the rest of her life.
Wow. Well, let's take a look, because Nick Barris did a great report on this. So here is Nick on this right now.
I mean, I don't feel nothing. I can pinch myself as hard as I can. I don't feel a thing. Nothing. No sensation.
Janine Grunman says she loved her body until now.
I cried. I mean, I cried. I wouldn't even get out of bed for almost 3 weeks.
Now she's willing to talk about a very personal matter in hopes of educating others. This mother of 8 favored wearing bikinis, especially after having successful breast implant surgery.
I've always thought that my body was in good shape.
Then Grunman opted for a procedure to minimize the scar on her breast. This is the consent form. It clearly calls for only a bilateral breast scar revision along with abdominal liposuction. It was supposed to be
simple, quick, no problem.
Not so.
She's lost her nipple, she's deformed, she's gone into this procedure with relatively healthy breasts, and now she looks terrible.
Grunman's attorney, Clint Kelly, filed this lawsuit alleging Dr. Robert Garza was negligent, committed medical battery, and went far beyond what Grunman consented to.
What he did was he did a complete breast reconstruction, including working around the nipple and the areola. She didn't authorize that, did not expect that to happen, and he botched it.
The photographs are too graphic to show.
This picture is taken days after the surgery, where the tissue around the nipple and on the nipple is effectively dead.
In a court document filed in response to the lawsuit, Dr. Garza denies he committed medical battery or acted negligently. Garza's attorney says his client disputes Grunman's claims and the case will be defended in court. Grunman hopes whatever happens, she gets some answers, though she believes physically she'll never be the same again.
It was the worst thing I've ever experienced in my life.
Nick Barris, News Channel 5.
All right, and there is an example, unfortunately, of what can happen when doctors make those kinds of mistakes.
That's correct. And like I said, Ms. Grumman's going to be deformed the rest of her life because of that. And, you know, unfortunately, when you put yourself in the hands of someone with a scalpel and you trust them, and these things happen, the only alternative you have is to use the court system. That's what it's here for, is to provide justice. And you know, she will get her day in court.
And, you know, and I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but for folks that are just tuning in, I know that there's that 1-year statute of limitations, but you kind of defined it even in more depth, because I think a lot of people think, okay, I had the surgery or I had the mix-up or something happened on this date, and I've only got a year, and it's actually, kind of explain that more. It's not just from the year that the surgery took place, it's from a different situation.
Correct. Like, let's say in this case, Ms. Grumman, she didn't know until she had taken the bandages off what had happened to her breast because they're covered up. And so she wouldn't know until that day that there had been work done around her nipple and areola. So that would be the first earliest date that she could have discovered an injury as opposed to the actual date of the surgery. So we calculate the year from the date of discovery. Ms. Groman contacted me just a few weeks after the surgery, and it was pretty evident what had happened to her, and she had a pretty good idea of what the future was going to hold for her, because she got an opinion from another plastic surgeon who said she's going to have more surgery to try to repair what's been lost, but again, she's never going to look like she's supposed to because of this botched surgery.
Right. We've got so many questions. We are going to go back to our lines right now. Teresa is on the phone with us. We're glad you called. Teresa, do you have a question or comment for Clint Kelly?
Yes. My daughter had surgery, gallbladder surgery, in which after the surgery, the bladder was going to her bile, which caused her some ongoing problems as far as bacterial infection. And now they have diagnosed her as with Crohn's disease. So she's back and forth to the hospital with a lot of inflammation in her intestines and all this. So I'm wondering if that surgery was a direct cause of this.
It's a distinct possibility, Teresa. I've had a botched gallbladder case before. That surgery is very common, but there are certain rules that apply in doing that surgery. And in this case, I can't tell enough from what she's describing to me to say it's a product of negligence. It certainly can be a bad outcome where the surgeon did everything he was supposed to. But that would be an example where you just simply call my office, ask to speak to Nurse Kathy, tell her what happened, and my number's up there on the board. And Kathy will write up a report, and then I'll make a judgment whether I think it's a case or not. But see, Teresa's doing exactly what you should do.
Absolutely. So Teresa, very smart to do that. We're glad that you called this evening. And that number that you can call the Kelly firm, and Teresa, you can do this in the morning, 615-824-3703. 615-824-3703 is the number to call. And it is absolutely free. There is no cost for that call,
Correct.
Which is so important. Now, Clint, one of the questions that we've had, what if someone has had a weight reduction surgery and they're not sure if they're supposed to be losing as much weight as they are losing? When is it time that they can say, hey, something I think went wrong with the surgery, because they may be feeling poorly, but maybe they just think it's a cause of the losing weight and that kind of thing?
Well, as to when they would know, you would probably have to get an opinion from a medical doctor as to when the best outcome, the time for that outcome is passed, okay? Because obviously there's some period of time you have to allow to pass in order to let the surgery take. Those cases, though, would be very hard, in my judgment, to win, because there's no guarantee of success in those cases. And the harm is simply that you didn't lose all the weight. I had a case where a lady had weight loss surgery and died because she had a small bowel obstruction 2 weeks after the surgery. And there's no question it was a product of the surgery. And the surgeon had asked for a procedure to be done on this lady, and she ended up drinking a carbonated beverage. She was not supposed to do that, but the nurses had not been trained properly on how to perform the procedure. It was like a diagnostic procedure to see what was going on. And she threw up and aspirated the contents of her vomit. So that's a situation where you definitely have a case because it's wrongful death, but I think simply not losing enough weight from weight loss surgery that's a tough hill to climb.
Right. So one of the things that I think is important that people understand, though, is like you were explaining, it is from that date when they realize that there is a problem.
Yes.
And that's what is so important. One thing, too, that people don't realize is in that, though, your statute of limitations, what you do when you think there is a problem as far as getting your medical records, because you can get your medical records.
You by law, you are entitled to retrieve all of your medical records from any provider. Typically, your provider will give them to you that day. Sometimes it may take them up to 30 days if they have a third party who's responsible for putting the records together. But there's no need to wait to get your records. If you suspect that there's been a major medical mistake and a major medical injury, that's when you just pick up the phone and call, just like Teresa did. You don't have to wait for the records. I can get the records. Or if you contact me, I may ask, like say for Teresa, I may say, Teresa, you might get your records faster than I can. Just go to whichever hospital this procedure was done at, or this doctor, this surgeon, and go ahead and get them for me to review. But there's no need to get the records first. call me first, and I'll take care of it from there.
I know, as I always read up on this as we're getting ready to do this show, there's numerous times when someone has a very strong case, but they opt not to do anything. Why do you think that is? And I know that's kind of a generalization, but I see that happening as I read through.
Like we discussed earlier, part of it is, I believe there is, in some people in the community, an intense distrust of lawyers and the system, or fear of the system, like what you mentioned earlier. I also think there's some people who really believe they're going to get better, and then they don't. And they've waited too long, and the clock has ticked on them too long, and their ability to bring a claim is passed. There are just some people, Chuck, that aren't going to sue. I don't care what happens to them, they're not going to do it.
Well, what about you read that it's more difficult for older people to bring certain cases forth?
It is now. The legislature passed some laws about 6 years ago which puts a cap on how much in non-economic damages a jury can award. So they took that right away from the juries and basically assumed it for themselves. So there's a government-imposed cap, and your elderly people typically aren't in the workforce anymore. So there's no lost earnings. But you may have an elderly person who's suffered a bad injury, and all they can prove is pain and suffering or loss of enjoyment of life, or perhaps some medical expenses associated with it. If there's a cap, and in this case usually it's $750,000, but it costs $100,000 to bring the case, that can be a tough case to bring. I mean, you may, as a lawyer, make a decision, say, I can't afford to take it, it's too much risk. That's what happens when government takes over things that should be left to the jury.
And you know, one of the things that we were talking about, and unfortunately seems to be happening more and more, these cases where, I mean, and I know people out there watching right now are going, you know what, that I have heard of that happening. But when a doctor operates on the wrong patient, they operate on the wrong body part, that sort of thing, kind of, why do you see that happening?
Yeah, I think that is a product of having too much volume. The doctor is trying to get too many patients operated on within a compressed period of time. And that may be simply because the hospital has put certain revenue targets on the board, so to speak, for the doctors to meet. And you know, I don't know if you've heard the term, Chuck, assembly line medicine. We're seeing more and more of that. Those of us that go to the hospital for procedures to be done, we feel like cattle because they just herd us in and herd us out in large numbers. Well, if you know, anytime you do something too fast, the odds of you making a mistake go up and the safety margin begins to narrow. And so I think what's happening is there are too many patients compressed in too short a period of time having procedures done, and that's when shortcuts are taken. You don't check the consent form to make sure you've got the right patient, or you don't check the body to make sure you've got the right body part, or maybe the body part that's supposed to be operated on is not the one that's got an X on it. And doctors sometimes just rely on their memories. Oh, I remember this patient, she came to see me a month ago, I know what she's supposed to have, and turns out he got the patient mixed up.
Okay, we are going to take a break, but you know, one of the things is they talk about the possible repeal of the Affordable Care Act. That could also affect people moving forward, so we will talk about that when we come back here on Open Line, so come on back with us.